I'm from Scotland, and when I was a child, my mum and dad took my sister and I on a trip to Fort William, which is a town up in the Highlands. People go there for skiing and hiking. It wasn't winter, so we were there to do some easy hiking and to stay for a couple of nights. My sister and I were quite young. I was about 11. I can't remember the name of the hotel we stayed at, but I do remember that it was old-fashioned, and we were all in one room together. There was a single bed where I was sleeping, a double bed in the middle, my parents were there, and another single on the other side, my sister's. I was often frightened when I was a girl. I didn't like the dark, and I was super scared of the possibility of ghosts, etc. I never found it easy to sleep because of this, even at home. I vividly remember tossing and turning that night in the hotel for a long time before lying on my back and trying to calm myself down. I then felt the bed sink a little next to my feet. I heard the creak of the old mattress. Someone was sitting at the foot of my bed. My heart was honestly pounding. I hadn't heard my sister or parents get up, so I was terrified. Whatever was sitting there quickly moved so it was sitting on my feet. I felt the weight of whatever it was. I heard the mattress creak again. My feet were freezing cold. It then moved off my feet and settled down next to them again. The old mattress shifted and creaked again. Within a second or two, I felt the coldest I've ever been. But not throughout my whole body. The coldness was slowly rising up from my feet, accompanied by a feeling of pressure. I was too scared to open my eyes. I was willing myself to call for my mum, but I was so scared that I couldn't at first. When I managed to shout out and wake the rest of my family, the cold, pressured feeling had reached up to my knees. When the lights were switched on, the feeling vanished. I have no explanation for this whole situation. My dad slept in that bed that night, and I stayed awake the whole night in the double with my mum. It all began when I was a child. My childhood wasn't very great in the beginning, because my father was, and is probably, a total monster and arsehole. He often was drunk and beat my mother. Finally, she decided to run away from him. She took me with her because she didn't want to leave me with him alone. We packed our stuff when he was at work and ran from the place. We fled to my grandma and my aunt. They lived in a village far away from our old home, but there we were safe. It was the first time I'd met them, and I quickly fell in love with both of them. They were really nice and cool people. A bit weird on first sight because of their hobbies. They were interested in occultism, magic and witchcraft. Even the house they lived in looked magical. It was old and beautiful, but at night it could be scary. But soon I began to feel very comfortable in the house. My mother, on the other hand, didn't like it. She was still afraid that my father could find us, and she hated that occult stuff, although she grew up with it. My family was not usual. My grandma told me stories that her ancestors were magicians and witches. My grandpa, who I never met because he died a long time before my birth, was a demonologist who did researches in paranormal stuff. It sounded wild and straight up out of a fantasy book, but I loved it, and soon I began to believe in that stuff. My grandma also told me stories about ghosts, demons, and other creatures, and that there are ones who live in the house. At first I was afraid, but my grandma told me that there isn't anything I have to be scared of. But I had to follow some rules. There was a room, which belonged to my grandpa. He used it for studies. In this room, and in the cellar, I was not allowed to go in. A few weeks passed by and I got used to the beautiful and slightly creepy house, but I always had the feeling that somebody was watching me. Soon I began to see things. Shadows and little movements. It creeped me out in the beginning, but my grandma told me that I didn't have to be afraid. It's just Thomas. Thomas was a ghost who was haunting the house, she told me. That he lived in here and passed away many years ago. He's harmless, and if I should see him, I can greet him. That would make him happy. And she was right. Thomas was very harmless. But soon I saw other things, and not all of them were nice and friendly. I remember my first encounter with one of the entities that scared me for real. It was my first summer with my grandma and my aunt. My aunt had a big and very friendly dog called Teddy. We played in the backyard of the house. It was a hot day and my aunt said that she would get us something to drink. Teddy followed my aunt everywhere, so he went with her inside while I waited outside. Near the house there was a little forest. I remember that I stared a while in the direction of it, and then I saw someone who came out of there. At first I thought that it was a hiker, but the person didn't look like that. It was a very tall man who wore a black coat, a black scarf, and a hat. I couldn't see his face, and his clothing didn't match up to the hot weather. He must be hot. He came straight up to our yard and stopped right before the fence. He didn't do anything, he just stared in my direction, and then he called my name. I know this sounds unbelievable, but it's what I saw and heard. He waved at me and called my name over and over again. His voice sounded smooth and kind. I didn't know why, but I wanted to go closer. And then suddenly, Teddy ran past me and barked at the man. Teddy was a very friendly dog who was happy about every visitor, but this day, he behaved differently. The barking was aggressive and he growled. It was like he wanted to protect me. My aunt ran out of the house too as she heard Teddy's barking. I remember how I turned around to her. She was confused because it was the first time she saw her dog like that. She asked me what happened and I told her that there was this strange man all in black. But when I turned around, the man was gone. And with gone, I mean he vanished into thin air. We couldn't see him anywhere. Maybe he went back to the forest, but that was impossible, because he couldn't be that fast. Teddy stared for a while to the forest and growled silently. My aunt tried to shut him up, but for the first time, he didn't listen for a while. She then asked me again who this man was. I told her again what I saw and what I heard. Although she didn't see him, she became afraid. We went inside the house and my aunt checked more than once the backyard through the windows. I was scared too. I didn't know this man, but he knew my name, and then his winter clothes. It was a weird, creepy moment, but it doesn't end there. After that, sometimes I could hear the voice of the man. He called me even when I was in the house, and it seemed like only I could hear it. No one else. I got nightmares out of nowhere. I woke up with scratches over my arms. There were cold spots in the house. Teddy behaved weird and began to look in corners where nothing was. He barked and growled aggressively more often. Noticed that there was already something paranormal in the house and Teddy was used to stuff like that. My grandma noticed quickly that something was wrong and she and her daughters had a talk about what they should do. My mother wanted to leave, but there was no place where we could go. My grandma, on the other hand, decided to solve the problem in her own way. She prepared rituals and spells and other magical stuff. Well, the problem was solved quickly, but before that there was a night that I can't forget. It was a Saturday and we watched TV as suddenly loud noises came from upstairs. They sounded like very heavy steps. Teddy began immediately to growl. We didn't make a move, we just listened. The steps got faster, and then it sounded like someone was running. My mother took me in her arms, She was afraid. I think we all were. Although my grandma didn't show fear. The noises stopped for a moment, and then we heard them going down the stairs. My grandma immediately stood up and went out of the living room. I heard her saying things. I don't remember what kind of words she said, but it sounded like she was threatening someone. Or in this case, something. And then, the smooth voice began to call my name again. But this time, we all could hear it. The growling of Teddy the dog became louder, and the words of my grandma also got very aggressive. And suddenly, it became quiet. For the following events, to give you a better understanding, I have to mention that the door to the cellar isn't far away from the living room. The next few minutes, it was very quiet. My grandma mumbled something and we thought that it's over. But then, loud knocking, which came from the cellar door, started. The door was locked and it sounded like someone was trapped in there. And then the knocking was followed by loud, creepy laughter. I can remember it clearly and it scares me and brings tears to my eyes. Till this day I'm afraid of this voice, of this laughter and banging. But luckily I never heard it again after that night. I also never saw that strange man again. I didn't sleep that night and had sleeping problems the following ones. But after that, my life was normal again. Just my grandma, my aunt and her dog, my mum, and a few friendly ghosts and me. Over the years, occultism and paranormal things became a hobby for me. It runs in the family. I was hoping to find out who or what this man was. An evil ghost? A demon? Something else? I really don't know, but to be honest, I don't know if I want to know the truth about this thing. The only thing I know is that this man was dangerous. It wasn't like Thomas, whose worst habits was to toss things down if he was in a bad mood. And a few years ago, I saw for the first time the cellar of the house. I was hoping that maybe something was down there, that somehow connected to this entity, because it vanished in the cellar. Sadly, it wasn't that exciting, just old and useless stuff. Nothing paranormal, but I was still scared. I can tell you that. Growing up on an Indian reservation, almost everyone has a spooky story. I've had a few experiences, but nothing overly spooky. But one of the best ones I've ever heard was from one of my uncles when he was younger. He grew up on the Standing Rock Reservation, Fort Yates specifically. South of Fort Yates, on the South Dakota side, is a small town called Mobridge. It's about 30 miles away, and when it's nice out, people from Fort Yates will walk the 30 miles to Mobridge for the bars and whatnot, usually catching a ride part way. It's an ugly little country road, and because alcoholism is prevalent down there, there's been a lot of drunk driving deaths on that road. Anyway, one morning, he's walking back from Mobridge after a night of drinking. It's like 6 in the morning, and he said he figured he had slept and was sober enough to walk back. He said he'd been walking for about an hour or so when he came over a hill and saw a girl walking from the field to meet him on the road. He said she was native and dressed in regular jeans and whatnot, but like super pretty. So he figured she was just some girl walking down to Mobridge or up to Fort Yates. So she meets up with him on the side of the road and she starts talking to him. He said she was asking him if he was hungry and saying he looked tired, and that he should come with her to her home so he could eat and rest. He asked her where she lived because he didn't see a house, and she pointed to the trees about a mile away. He thought the trees probably blocked the house so he couldn't see it. He said she just about convinced him to go with her when he looked down and saw that her feet were backwards. He said he froze, stopped talking, and turned around to start walking back towards Mobridge. She was following him, telling him that he was going to die on that road and that he should just come back to her home because it'll be warm, and that he could sleep with her. But he just ignored her and kept walking, not saying a word. He said she must have followed him for about 10 or 15 minutes before a car coming from Fort Yates stopped and picked him up. As he was getting in the car, she kept telling him not to get in because he was going to die in that car in an accident. When he got in and they started driving, he asked the people in the car if they had heard what she said, but they told him that he was walking alone. In our culture, we have these things whose names roughly translate to tree witch, and he was fully convinced that's what was talking to him that morning. This experience happened when I was 14. Since I was a child, I was fascinated with the occult and paranormal, and also had a few encounters. It was a family thing, and I grew up with that stuff. One day, I was on winter holidays. Two of my friends called me. For the story, I'll call them Ben and Joseph. They're not their real names. They said that they found an old empty building that they wanted to visit and asked me if I wanted to join them. Ben told me also that it isn't a normal building. According to old stories, it's haunted. They knew I was into that stuff, and I absolutely wanted to go with them. My mum and my grandma, who know many things about occultism, witchcraft, etc., didn't want me to go at first. My grandma said that this is a place I don't know, and could be very dangerous to search there after paranormal things. But I managed to persuade them. I had a few paranormal experiences before, and for me it wasn't a game. I have the right respect, and I'm careful with occult and paranormal things, because something like that can easily go wrong. Well, the day came where we three set off to the abandoned building. For that, we had to drive a long way, with the train in a little city where relatives of Ben lived. We stayed by them for the next few days. On the way, we talked to each other about this building. Ben told me that it's a house that belonged to a doctor who also had his office in there. It was very old and should soon be demolished. He then told me a few stories about this house. There were apparently many ghosts in there, once patients of the doctor, and sometimes people would disappear in there. In some nights, you could see figures behind the windows, and some people have heard horrible screams which came from the inside. Not many dared go in there, sometimes just teenagers who wanted to test their courage, especially on Halloween. I believe in ghosts, but I am also skeptical about stories like this one. There are many like that out there, and most of the time it's things that people make up over the years. The older the building, the scarier the stories. But again, I'm respectful towards that, because you don't know who or what you could make angry. Joseph, on the other hand, didn't believe in that stuff. For him, it sounded like an adventure, but he didn't believe that we would see a ghost or something. This is why I like him so much. Although he's very skeptical, he doesn't make fun of people who experience weird things. Our group is a healthy mix of different opinions. We arrived in the afternoon, but we were too tired to go to the house that day, so we decided to go the next day. The house was really creepy, very old, and we already had a bad feeling about it. My senses told me that it could be a bad idea to go in there. Joseph wasn't that afraid, but Ben was already scared. He isn't that brave. I could understand him and told her that we're with him and he doesn't have to be afraid. As a child, I had an experience with something you could describe as a really evil entity. After that experience, my grandma gave me some sort of talisman which would protect me. I lent it to Ben with the hope that it would make him feel better, and it worked for a while. Finally, we entered the building. It was empty in there, just garbage, pieces of broken furniture, and graffiti on the walls. The worst thing was the smell. It really stank bad in there. We began to investigate the rooms. Most of the time, nothing happened. After a while, we wanted to go because we had seen all the rooms. But then we heard something. Something that sounded like screams. At first they were quiet, but they got louder and louder. The screams were female, and sounded like the person was in really bad pain. At first, Joseph thought they came from the outside, but that wasn't the case. They definitely came from one of the rooms downstairs. Ben became very scared at that point, and I feared that he would have a panic attack. We decided that it was time to go. The screams got louder and more horrible when we went downstairs. I thought that I could hear the words, "Help me," in those screams. And one thing I noticed was a new smell. It was also bad like the time we entered the house, but it was different. It was so creepy, we ran outside and Ben had to vomit. For him it was too much, and also Joseph, our skeptic, was scared. Near the house there lived other people, and one of them, a young man, came to us and shouted at us, "What are you doing in this house? And why were we making such noises?" We then told him what happened and that we weren't responsible for the screams. He didn't believe us at first and thought a friend of ours was in there. He went into the house, Joseph and I followed him, Ben waited outside. The screaming had already stopped when we entered. We went through every room again, but there was nobody. Joseph searched after tracks to see if someone else could have been in there, but there was nothing. We asked the man if something like that would happen more often, and he denied it. After some time, the old house was demolished, and I hope that, with it, the terrible screams were gone also. I've always been interested in the paranormal, and witnessed and experienced some events that I can't explain to this day. But I'm a very rational person, so I always brushed it off, while keeping an open mind, of course. But one of those experiences left me with no doubt. My current girlfriend used to work at a cafe/bakery in an old building in Bordeaux. She used to close at night alone because she was the store manager and stayed after the crew was done to count the register, do all the paperwork, etc. The bakery was made of a storefront, the kitchen in the back, and the office in the back as well. There's also a second floor which is only storage and the changing rooms for staff. The building isn't shared, it was only the cafe. She told me she felt uneasy as soon as her first shift there. Most nights, she'd hear running footsteps upstairs. The TVs in the sitting areas for the customers turning on and off randomly, and the front door's doorbell ringing while the door was not even moving. All that when she was alone. Another co-worker she was close with shared the same experiences with her. I believed her because she had a history of paranormal encounters and is very serious about that stuff. But I wasn't convinced until I witnessed it. I also worked in the food industry, so I was rarely off when she was working too. One Sunday I was off, so I decided to come pick her up and spend the last 30 to 45 minutes of her workday that she usually spends alone with her this time. She gave me a tour of the place and I did feel uneasy, but nothing significant happened except for some rattling noises upstairs, until I mentioned how quiet her ghost of the bakery was. She was counting the register in the office in the back of the store. I was leaning against the wall in the corridor leading to the office, my back turned away from the storefront. To my right there was the dishwashing room. There was no door to this room, just an opening in the corridor. To better visualize, I was facing towards the office watching my girlfriend, turning my back on the storefront, leaning against the wall but seeing the dishwasher room in my peripheral vision. Jokingly, I tell her, "I'm glad your ghost decided to leave us alone tonight." Not 1 second after I finish my sentence, the pile of glasses and dishes in the dishwasher room goes flying. I saw the whole room clearly in my side vision, and there was no one or nothing that could have done that. There was a pile of glasses stacked up in a pyramid, and they flew as if someone run their hand through the base. It wasn't one glass tipping and bringing down the pyramid, it was legit pushed off. She just told me, "I told you he's always there," since she's used to stuff like this happening. She was almost done, so we stayed less than 10 minutes in there. But I could feel a different level of oppression and uneasiness for the whole time. This one sticks with me because there's no rational explanation. I saw the dishes go flying around, and it was in a direct response to my joke. So this story happened about 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it is the single most mind-boggling thing that I've ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened in mid-December. I'm from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night. Like, if you get stuck outside, you will die kind of cold. That plus the snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house and even immediately outside of it. Well, me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing video games. We were also the only ones home. The reason it was just us is because my mother went straight from work to a bar to grab a few drinks with co-workers. So me and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family wine and live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I hear the door to the garage open and slam shut. I immediately go, "Oh shit," and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, "I thought your mum was supposed to be out all night." "She was," I replied. I then heard a few heavy stomps and hear my mother yell out my name followed by, "Anyone home?" I yell back upstairs, "Yep, just hanging out in the basement." I hear a few more steps move from the garage door towards the stairs, and she yells out again, "Can you come help me with something? I need you up here." I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle. "Yep, give me a minute." Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" she yelled back in a more concerned tone, in a voice that was slightly off my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was very open to all family and friends, and the voice, it was just wrong. It sounded like my mother's, but was missing something that I couldn't put my finger on. Weirded out, I replied back, "Just Colton." After I yelled that back to her, I found a good place to hide the bottle and began walking up the stairs to the next level. Now, as I was walking up the stairs, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house, and the silent, electric twinge that something isn't right. When I got to the top of the steps, I look over to where the door to the garage is, and also the kitchen right next to it, and it's black, pitch black. All the lights were off, and there was no moonlight shining through any windows. I walked over to the kitchen, yelling out, "Mum, where are you?" There was no reply, just silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full needles, and my adrenaline kicking in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. "What's wrong?" Colton says. "My mum's not home," I reply as fast as I can, looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking with her." I could see the confusion in his face. "There's no one home. We need to leave now." I took a few steps towards the back door that opens up to the yard, and then I see my dog shaking on the couch, and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew that if we left, something would happen. "Are we leaving?" Colton said, still confused as all hell. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off. I'm gonna call my mum and figure this out. I pull out my phone and call my mum. She picks up immediately. What's going on? She answers. Mum, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level, and when I went up, you weren't there, I said frantically, hoping she was playing a joke. No, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay? What do you mean you heard me? I fill her in on the whole story and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she got home. But before she did, we could hear something upstairs. Not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air. Like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next. And the word that I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave as quick as it came. Like an overbearing predatory presence had just flown away. We still have never figured out what the hell was going on, and this is just one story of many unexplained things that have happened to us. But this is the easiest to write down, and one I was happy to have a witness. My mother has passed away now, and I've moved away to Arizona. But whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what happened. I'll never truly know what happened, but I know that whatever it was that had my mother's voice, it was evil, and it was hungry.